I'd like to welcome you to a program we're going to call Monday Review. We're simply going to take a little time on Mondays to call different pastors, see how their day went on Sunday, how their sermons went, how their service went, a little time of fellowship, and let some of our people see what's going on in different parts of the country, maybe even different parts of the world. We'll try to be a blessing to you through this program, and if the Lord blesses it, we'll keep it going as long as we can. Today we're going to talk to Nathan Irie, who's the pastor of People's Baptist Church down in Folkston, Georgia. And so without any delay, we'll go ahead and pick him up here. Hey, Brother Nate.
Yes, sir.
How you doing, my brother?
Doing well so far.
All right. Hey, man, my daughter pointed out to me this past week that we had been here for 2 years. And what that means to me is that you've been the pastor at People's Baptist Church for 2 years.
That sounds about right.
Hey, man, how does that feel?
I'm not sure yet. Probably still processing that information. I actually just thought about that today. The fact of being here for 2 years. So it's it feels good. I don't want to make it sound like it's bad. It feels pretty good, to be honest.
What do you think? What do you think is maybe your what you would think maybe was your biggest accomplishment in the 2 years? What have you got done, do you think?
Honestly, a lot of the building maintenance. We got the water. The water had a bad sulfur problem here, and it had extremely hard water. Was eating all the fixtures up. So we got that taken care of. I think within the first 6 months of being here, we got the windows and the entire church replaced. We've got the fellowship hall, prophet's chamber, about half done. We got one room and the bathroom entirely redone. So we got a lot of building maintenance taken care of within the first 2 years. And right now the focus is really on what it should be on as far as getting the gospel out, trying to increase our borders, so to speak, trying to figure out ways to just find outlets to put gospel tracts, going out on the streets and holding signs. Just this past weekend, just got on a radio station up in Brunswick, Georgia. So,
what kind of coverage is that going to? What kind of reach is that going to have for you? What kind of like land area coverage is that?
I don't know what the radius would be in miles. I know that Brunswick is about an hour drive from here, so I'm going to guess somewhere around 50 miles, and that radio station reaches us pretty well. If you get under a power line, there's a little bit of interference, just the way that FM radio stations work, I guess. So it's, if it's a guess. It's a guess, but I would say maybe a 50-mile radius. Might be more. I'm not sure.
Hey, man, what does that cost?
About $75 a week is what they're going to charge us. $75 a broadcast, and we'll be on once a week.
You're going to do the preaching on it every week? You're going to have some different guys doing it, or what?
For right now, it'll be just myself, as far as I know.
Okay. All right. Well, the main reason we wanted to start this program was to talk to preachers, and we're going to talk to you for a while. We're going to use you as a crash test dummy to get some upgrades maybe to equipment, and maybe make it where we can not just see my ugly face, but we can see both of us, and then once we get all the equipment set up, and we'll get some popular preachers, and we'll say goodbye to you.
That sounds good to me.
No, you know I'm just kidding about that, but yeah, man. The reason we're having this program is to talk to preachers. I know preachers don't usually get to talk to one another unless they're good friends, but there are a lot of preachers who actually like one another but don't get a chance to talk to one another on a regular basis. So I wanted to start this program just to kind of like ask you a few questions about your service on the Sunday before, like this is going to be called Monday Review, and we're just going to review Sunday's service, talk about services there, maybe a little bit about services here, but what we want to know really is, now you preached a sermon yesterday. I'm sure you probably preached 3 sermons yesterday, and I know how it is as a preacher. You have an outline, you've got in your mind, you've got it down what you want to say, but in the course of a sermon you don't always get to say everything that you thought you would. So we'll talk about what you did say, and then maybe we'll talk about some things you didn't get to say. Not that you regret not saying it, but it just didn't go that way. We'll talk about some things like that, and if that's okay with you.
Yeah, sounds good to me.
All right, how was Sunday school?
Sunday school, I actually didn't teach. My assistant, Spike Albritton, he taught, did a real good job. He's in the book of Philippians, in Philippians chapter 1, just going verse by verse. So it went pretty well.
And he's teaching every week now?
He's teaching every week.
That's good. Brother Spike is a good preacher. I know if he gets in there and studies real good, he always has a pretty good perspective on things.
Oh, yes, he does. Yes, he does.
Amen. All right, so you preached the morning service and the evening service?
I did. I preached the morning service and the evening. Yesterday morning, I preached on the thief out of John chapter 10. And then last night, it was more of teaching. I've been going through the book of Ephesians. Excuse me. I started when I took the pastorate. I started the book of Ephesians and got through about the first 3 chapters, and then switched and went to 1 Corinthians. And so now I've gotten about halfway through 1 Corinthians, and now I've gone back to Ephesians. And it seemed a little bit, I kind of felt bad about doing that at first, but there's a lot of material that I'd covered in the first 3 chapters of Ephesians, and then hitting the first 8 chapters it's actually first 7 chapters of 1 Corinthians, particularly chapters 1, 2, 3, and 4. Man, it was really timely for our church. So it worked out really well. And so I think, again, where we're at as a church, where we're at in Ephesians chapter 4 is very timely.
So when you say you started teaching the book of Ephesians, do you feel like Atlas with the world on his shoulders? Because that's a pretty hefty book.
Well, somewhat. I think I kind of had it pretty easy in that regard. I've heard that said before, and I wouldn't disagree with that at all. It is a hefty book, but we were set up pretty well from the former pastor that was here. So I mean, he had already been going through that, which obviously was you. But anyways, it was already set up. So really, when I went through the first 3 chapters, it was really highlights. I was hitting high points. I took the first chapter trying to basically point out the difference between a Christian standing in state and what his standing is in Christ according to Ephesians chapter 1, and really tried to drive that home. And I think that went over pretty well as far as being able to communicate that. And then came through Ephesians chapter 2, dealt with a lot of material there, and then Ephesians chapter 3 tried to just re-emphasize the fact that the church was not something that was understood in the Old Testament. That was a revelation that was given to Paul. And so talking about all of those things, I don't know how to explain it. In my mind, when I try to teach a book, it has... I try to teach the book in the context of the book, instead of trying to use the book as a platform to teach what I'd like to teach.
Yeah, amen.
So I don't know any better way to say it than that.
Yeah.
But what that does for me is it helps me understand really what the author is writing, what he's intending to say. And I'm not talking about getting away from what's actually written. I'm not trying to indicate that at all. But I think that there's a grand understanding there that's missed by a lot of guys who are teaching verse by verse, which I believe is a great method in teaching, but they're isolated, they're segmented statements.
Right.
So, anyways.
Yeah, that's good. The method of using a book or a chapter or a verse to teach the rest of the Bible. I'm with you. I think Ephesians was meant to teach Ephesians, and then of course the book of Ephesians will go hand in hand with the rest of the Bible. It's part of a larger book.
Absolutely.
But I think you're right about that. It's the book of Ephesians is trying to say something as a whole, and you got some there. And I wasn't really thinking of going this way, but you bring up a good point, and we'll get back to talking about your service yesterday. But you were talking about, and of course I was the pastor of that church before, and I'm definitely not here today to talk about me, but we did go through the book of Ephesians quite a bit when I was there, and
Right.
It is a gigantic book. But what you said about the groundwork being laid there so that it makes your job a little easier, I think this is what's missing in the independent Baptist churches, is that one pastor leaves and another guy comes in who's disconnected from the pastor before him, and he even if that church has a good foundation laid, the new guy who came from Timbuktu, he doesn't have a clue what they know, and so he's not able to take advantage of that.
Right.
And the people are not able to take advantage of someone who's building on on a foundation that somebody else laid. So a lot of independent Baptist churches suffer from getting a pastor from the outside.
Right.
Because we're all disconnected. People like to think we're connected because we go to the same camp meetings, and everybody loves Dr. So-and-so or Brother so-and-so, but that's really not the case. There is so much liberty of thought, and I have nothing against liberty of thought, but there's so much liberty of thought that a church that it goes in transition from one pastor to the next is really in danger, because there's no continuity, I think, and that continuity from pastor to pastor is, and some of these other churches like a Methodist church or a Presbyterian church and even a Catholic church, I mean, it's false doctrine, but the transition from bishop to bishop or pastor to pastor is not as dangerous. Of course, it may not matter as much, but it's not as dangerous because there's great continuity between the guy that's leaving and the guy that's coming in. And you bring up, when you say that, it brought to my mind something that's lacking in independent Baptist churches. Like a pastor leaving a church could be devastating to that church.
Sure.
Even
absolutely. And it seems to me that it often is. The problem, as far as I can tell, what looks like the issue is that Paul, to use a biblical illustration, the modern day Paul is either not finding the Timothys, or the Timothys are just simply not available.
Right.
I'm not sure what the issue is. I mean, I think that both sides could be charged, the leader and the follower. But at the end of the day, there's not really a whole lot of discipleship.
Right.
And because of that, I had a distinct advantage in taking this church, because not only did I not only did I have a great insight on what this church knew because I sat here and was being taught the same material, but I, in some degrees, actually grew with the church because, for obvious reasons. I was a part of this church here. I was not a bystander watching a pastor minister to his church. I was a member of that church being ministered to in the same way that church was being ministered to.
Right. Now,
Yeah, go ahead.
let me ask you this along those lines. Now, a person, an argument against what we're talking about would be that if we put an emphasis on continuity, then it might take away some liberty from the guy coming in. He might feel stifled. He might feel like he was under the shadow of the guy that left. Just speak from your own experience, and this is good because this wasn't even the plan of where we were going, but do you feel at all like you've been stifled, or that you've been hamstrung, or that you're living in the shadow of the pastor that was there before you, or have you had liberty?
Not at all. As a matter of fact, there were some things that you did during your tenure here that I just made the simple decision not to do. But I made those decisions just because you could call it freedom of conscience. You could call it, well, I didn't feel comfortable about doing X, Y, or Z, so I just decided not to do it. But I did. So to answer your question in a simple way, no, I don't feel stifled at all. But I have come out with a distinct advantage in the sense that the path has already been blazed for me. The administration of the church, the organization of the church has already been set up. I know how it operates. The people that are here, they know how it operates, and so there is no change at all. And so for a man to be in that kind of situation and feel as though, oh man, I feel stifled because he did it this way, the only thing that I could think of that would make the situation turn out like that is if the guy who took the church wasn't on board with the program to begin with.
Right.
So I don't know if that was all that clear, but no, I don't feel stifled at all. I feel like I have perfect liberty to do right. I was listening to a message the other day, as a matter of fact, that you preached, and I don't remember. It's on sermon audio, but it fits very well in this situation. You were talking about the matter of not believing in a democracy as far as the local church goes.
Right.
And you made the comment of, you said, and I may not get it exactly right, but basically the idea was, I believe in everybody being in unity about doing what's right.
Right.
And man, that seems on the surface, I think, to be tissue paper's worth of difference, but man, that is so huge.
Yes, it is. It really
is. The thing is, man, if you're interested in the truth, you're interested in doing things the way that God set it up, then the ideal way it should work is a guy can come in and establish a church, just like Paul did. Come in and evangelize an area, organize a church. Well, hey, Timothy, you stay right here and get this stuff all sorted out, because he's not going to do anything different than what Paul was doing.
Right. Right.
So now you've got the ability for churches to be established, get organized, be sustained, and then if that Timothy is faithful, like Paul told him to be, hey, what I told you, he said, commit thou to faithful men who will be able to teach others also.
Yeah, that's right.
Timothy, go find your own Timothys.
That's true. And a good example of that, being in unity about what's right, is a point that I've made a couple times since I've been here at Faith Baptist about money and giving. A lot of churches they want to serve the Lord, they claim to want to do right and different things like that, but if a pastor has a vision and he's trying to do a certain project and it costs money, a lot of people will be against spending the money, and they'll be worried about the money and different things like that. But in my lifetime, I've been in church since 1974, and since I've been able to give, of course when I was 5 years old I didn't have any money to give, but since I've been able to give, I've given money, and I have never once wondered what the church is doing with it, because I assume that the leadership of the church knows what to do with it. And I don't have to vote on spending, $2,000 or $50,000. I don't have to vote on that. I don't have to have my say in that because I gave it to God. It's not the congregation's money. It's not the pastor's money. It's God's money.
That's it.
But God did put a man there to oversee those things. And if you've got a guy that's crooked, he could, he could take advantage of that and he could do some dirty things with that kind of trust. But we're trying not to have dirty guys in the pulpit to begin with.
Right.
So I mean, so you'll get some bad ones, but that's a chance you take in life. You get bad ones.
Right. But see, if this thing with Paul finding Timothy's, if that process is there like it should be,
right,
that's a good way of sifting through all of those knuckleheads.
Right. Exactly. You're exactly right.
I mean, it's like a dog chasing its tail. Well, I don't trust this guy behind the pulpit to know what to do with the money. Well,
right.
Whoever it was that put him there, whoever it was that recommended him to the church or whatever, they thought he, was trustworthy.
Right.
So, whether right or wrong, I mean, to a certain degree, that's now pinned on their shoulders.
Right.
So,
a good question would be, if you, you're the pastor of the church there, but just supposing you're the guy sitting in the pew, if you don't trust your pastor to have enough wisdom and spirituality to do right with a checkbook, can you really trust him to lead you and guide you in your spiritual affairs on a weekly basis? That is in the qualifications in the book of Timothy.
Yeah.
That's the guy you got to have. You got to have the guy that you can, a guy that's leading his own household well and all these things. Those are qualifications that put the guy there to begin with. So a guy you can't trust in carnal things, you probably can't trust him. Well, the question was to you: Can you trust the guy spiritually that you can't trust physically?
Yeah, it'd be very difficult. I have made that same comment in the church here, pastoring here at the church, and it sounds arrogant. It sounds like it's vibrato.
It does.
But I mean, you got to think about it rationally, reasonably. Use a little common sense. I've presented that same line of thought to this church this way. Here I am. I'm a pastor. I am supposed to know what I'm doing, at least to some degree. Okay, but I recognize that there may be things that I've got room to grow on.
Sure.
I can be taught. I really can be taught. I'm looking for that information on a regular basis. That's why I listen to preaching myself.
Right.
I didn't quit listening to preaching the day that I became a pastor.
Right.
That's stupid. But nonetheless, I reasonably cannot take advice on how to pastor a church from a guy who's sitting in some church and doesn't even have his own family in order.
Right.
I mean, you don't take a man in the secular workforce who has failed and failed and failed and failed and then promote him.
Right.
That doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So along those same lines of reasoning, you don't take a guy who's not being able to run his family correctly and then that guy sit there and criticize a pastor and say, well, you're not doing this right. Well, 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. Maybe he's not. But my soul, man, it just, this is the situation that the Lord was talking about. You pulling a mote out while you got a beam out of your eye.
That's true.
So, if I didn't have confidence in a pastor's ability to manage his own finances, man, it'd be very difficult to have confidence in him in spiritual things.
Right. Right.
And I'll say this, I'll flip that around and say this. I believe it's possible for a fella to learn to have confidence in his pastor regarding financial issues if he'll learn to recognize that his pastor's trustworthy in spiritual issues.
Right. Yeah, right.
Sit under a guy who you sit under a pastor. Let's say here's a guy sits under a pastor who's clueless when it comes to finances. Okay, fine. Well, when he gets up and preaches, man, every time he gets up and preaches, God's dealing with your heart. God's pointing things out in your life that needs to be corrected. You're growing. You're learning things. Well, I mean, if God can open up the Bible to that fella about all of that stuff, what makes you think God can't open up the Bible to him about financial issues?
Right. Exactly.
It just, yeah, man, you can trust the Lord. Lord can get through to that fella.
Yeah, and if you've got a pastor or a preacher, say it's an evangelist or somebody like that, if you see a guy who's growing himself, then there's no question in my mind that you would grow with him by listening to what he's talking about. Especially now, the guy could be a jerk,
right,
and he could be putting on a show.
Right.
Here, a lot of people do this. A preacher will get into a congregation, and he will preach, and some people don't like it, and maybe it's a majority of the people that don't like it. He'll kind of bend himself to what they want. He'll preach another message, they didn't like that, he'll stay away from that topic. What the congregation sees is a guy that's maturing.
Yeah.
And all he's really doing is pulling the wool over your eyes. So people be willing to follow that. But if you see a guy that preaches a sermon and then like 6 weeks later he comes and says, I'm sorry about this. I said this a couple weeks back. I was wrong about that. The Lord showed me this. This is, I'm more confident in making this statement. If you see a guy that can grow spiritually and doctrinally, the qualifications for a bishop in the book of Timothy doesn't have a lot of requirements, but there are a few requirements there. There's enough requirements there to where you can get a guy that you can at least pay attention to long enough to see if he is growing himself. And then if he's growing himself and he's lacking in one or two of those qualifications, and there's more qualifications than just what's found in Timothy, but say you see a guy that's apt to teach, he's got the aptitude to teach, and he is given to hospitality, and he is making an attempt at several of those qualifications. Even if he's not perfect, maybe he's young, he's not perfect, but he's not a novice either. You can see him grow, and I think I would have no problem sitting under a guy that way.
Sure.
But if I had a guy that was not trustworthy in any of those areas, and if I knew he wasn't trustworthy at all, if he had a track record of stealing money, then I'm not going to trust him spiritually or physically. But if he's making progress in his own life, then he's probably doing something right. And I think we've probably labored that point enough. But yeah, it's a very important thing, very important for independent churches.
Absolutely.
Maybe independent churches ought to be more particular. But let's see, a lot of things you said over the course of that little line of thought right there makes you a legalist or closed-minded. Some Baptists would even call you a bigot or judgmental, but I think it's all wise and sound sense there.
Yeah, I don't see it's really a road of liberty.
Right.
It really is. It seems on the surface at the entryway of that path, it seems to be very narrow, and it is a narrow path. But once you get on that path, man, you find out that you've got more liberty there than you do anywhere else.
Yeah, a narrow path is actually easier to walk because you don't have 75 feet of variance on each side to worry about. It's your conscience is less affected by a narrower path because you don't have that much stuff to worry about.
That's right.
But at any rate, let's get back to Sunday. You preached yesterday morning. I know you had something that you wanted to say, and you said that. That's probably on record. You probably said a lot of things that you wanted to say, but maybe in your sermon something you might have wanted to say but didn't get around to, a point you might think you said but didn't make clear enough. What do you think?
I don't really think I don't really remember anything yesterday morning that I said I missed. I was actually looking for my notes right here. I think everything that I had intended to say, it actually came out how I was trying. The bigger struggle was last night. I was trying to convey this idea of standing in state and dealing with the Christian's position in Romans chapter 6. Boy, I feel it's one of those situations to where you feel like you have it understood in your mind, but when you start to try to explain it, it comes out like melted butter across the pulpit.
It makes you feel kind of stupid, don't it?
Yes, like an absolute imbecile. And so, sometimes you get folks are really paying attention, and then at other times it looks like that dog looking at you and cocking their head when you holler at them or something, what?
Right.
So you're not really sure. But then, we had folks respond at the invitation last night, and I didn't really give an invitation last night, but folks responded. So,
Amen.
Man, it's kind of wild, man. The Lord, it seems to me that the Lord was working. So,
yeah, it's such a mystery. And I've said this a million times, but that there's a strange work that God does in men's heart. And if you try to do it while you're preaching, and people will respond to people. You've got people out there that are masters at manipulating people into, whether it's using emotional things or whatever. There are masters at that, and you got to really separate yourself. You really, as a preacher, you want to get the best messages you can, and you want to preach the best message that you can, but you really have to, even if you think you got the best message you've ever preached or the best outline you've ever made out, you really have to leave that at your desk.
yeah.
Your thoughts about the sermon, you have to leave it at your desk and trust the Lord to do something. But in the morning time yesterday, Sunday school and the morning service, I had very good liberty in my mind. I had, the Sunday school message I had preached before at People's, but the morning service message still had real good liberty. And listen, a lot of liberty. There's liberty in the Holy Spirit, and there's liberty in having had preached a sermon before. So there's more than one kind of liberty. But the evening service, I had never preached the sermon before, and I had probably never preached a sermon like it before. That's very difficult on a preacher. Some evangelists are great evangelists because they have that liberty that comes from having preached a sermon before, or the fact that their sermons are alike in a lot of ways, in their structure and different things like that. But last night, I didn't really feel a lot of liberty, although the message that I was trying to get across was there, but the getting the words untangled from a messy brain and making them come across, across your lips. There was a lot of stuff I stumbled in. There was a lot of times I could feel that it's probably only like a 3-second pause, but in your mind, standing in front of a couple hundred people, it seems like you just paused for 15 minutes. But there was a lot of that, but there was still the message came across, and good response, and praise the Lord for that. Hopefully the message will stick in the people's mind, and that the dangers that were talked about in the message won't ever come to pass for this church or for your church either. But the Lord, I think, oftentimes does more with sermons than we think He does. And that's a strange work that God does. And then at the end of this, there's always, whether you preach real good or whether you preach real bad, there's a guy that comes up to you after service and says, yeah, that what you were saying, and he gives you an interpretation of what you were saying that is absolutely not what you were saying. And you think to yourself, man, what did I mess up? And then you ask somebody else that heard the same sermon. He said, no, I heard it this way. And the way he heard it was exactly the way you said it. And so you can't tell me that there's something, whether it's spirit of man or spirit of God, that's working in a congregation. Some people, I think, can hear the voice of God in a sermon. And I don't mean my voice is the voice of God or your voice is the voice of God. It's just that some people, I believe God closes their ears to what's being said, and some people God opens their ears to what's being said, and there's a spiritual transaction going on, no question.
Yeah, there's no doubt. There's a verse in Proverbs that I have clung to in regards to that. It says, a man's heart deviseth his way, but the Lord directeth his steps.
Yeah.
And you can see that principle dealing with Micaiah, dealing with Ahab and King Jehoshaphat. This guy, they have this interaction between them, and Micaiah lies to him, tells him, yeah, go up at Ramoth Gilead, you're going to have, victory. And Ahab immediately knows that Micaiah is lying. And Micaiah turns right around and says, yep, I'm lying. Here's what happened up in heaven. Saw this spirit. Y'all go down and be a lying spirit in the mouth of the prophets. And they go up and do it anyway.
Right.
And the thing that blows me away is it seems like, Proverbs, I forget what chapter it is. There's it's somewhere around chapter 4, 5, or 6, but he says, my son, incline thine ear. And that, if that inclination is not there, if that humility is not there towards the Lord, you're going to hear something.
Right.
But what it is, man, my soul, it depends on your attitude, what you approach.
That's good. Yeah, that's a good saying right there. That's definitely truth. Definitely truth. All right, listen, we got 38 minutes right here. We'll try to make this about 40 minutes. Let me hear from you about, you've been there 2 years. You said you got a lot of things done with the buildings and stuff, and I know for a fact those things needed to be done. And I'm sure along the same lines, along the same time, you got some spiritual things done. And you said you were going to do some things differently than I'd done it, which is absolutely right. You should do things according to your own mind, as far as as long as the Lord leading you and all that stuff. You may or may not have had some pushback. I know people like to have it done the same way the old preachers done and stuff like that. But all that being in the past, it looks like you're on a roll now. And I say that, but when you said it's going to be this way, Brother Mike did it this way, but we're going to do it this way. You may or may not have got some pushback from that, but whether you did or whether you didn't, tomorrow or next Sunday's going to come, Wednesday night's going to come, next Sunday's going to come. What are you looking forward to? And maybe you're only looking forward to Wednesday night. Maybe you don't have long-term plans, but what would you like to see happen in the next 2 years if the Lord lets you be there that long?
I would really like to see the church get a much better appetite for seeing people saved.
Oh, yeah.
I really believe that we're right on the verge. I believe we're right on the verge of seeing that revival, that little spark of revival begin to be lit in the hearts of the congregation as a general whole. I think it's taken this long because there were some things that I had to learn. I came in with a preconceived notion of how it was going to be when I pastored. I've been here for 2 years and have found that it wasn't entirely opposite of what I thought, but there were a lot of things that I didn't know were even issues. That I didn't even know that those issues were in existence.
Right.
So those things had to be processed. had to pray about them, still praying about them, and as a result, the Lord helped me see some things, learn some things, and so the Lord has begun. It looks like that the Lord's begun to not only deal with my heart, but deal with the hearts of a lot of folks in the church about wanting to see people saved. And so what I'm really trying to do, I want to see folks saved. I want to see numbers, but I also want to see that spiritual development in the hearts of the folks that are here. You know, I could die tomorrow. I could pass away next week, God forbid. But if something that tragic took place, I'd like for this not to die with me or, you know, my assistant or whoever is here.
Right.
I'd like for people to be able to say, yeah, man, this has got to be carried on. Let's win some more people to Christ.
Oh, amen. Amen. That sounds like the last night's sermon from at Faith Baptist Church. We don't want the thing to end, and the day and time that we're living in, very fragile time.
Yes, it is.
Very fragile time. All right, my brother. We'll pick this up and do this again next week. I appreciate you spending 40 minutes with me. I thought that it was. I was a little nervous about trying to do this. I felt like it would feel scripted, and of course we just got on the phone and started talking. And we do this a lot, so we know how to talk to one another. But been a good 40 minutes. I appreciate your time.
Absolutely. Have a good day, brother.
All right, brother. We'll talk to you later.
Bye-bye.
All right, we appreciate you staying with us. We appreciate you tuning into this. I hope it was a blessing to you. I always get a blessing talking to Brother Nathan, and we don't always get to talk every week, but it's always a blessing to talk to Brother Nathan, a man that would rather talk to you about the Bible than most anything else, and he can talk about a lot of things. He's a pretty smart guy, and he's a young fella, but he has got a handle on the book far beyond his years, and I appreciate him. Matter of fact, I'm the assistant pastor here at Faith Baptist Church, and Brother Nathan was my associate pastor in Folkestone for probably about 8 years, and I learned to be a pastor actually before I learned to be an associate pastor, and Brother Nathan gave me a lot of instruction during his time as my associate pastor to help me be able to do the job that I do here. And I have a pastor to answer to here, and Brother Nathan helped me a lot in that. So without drawing this out any further, we thank you for joining us today, and hope you get a blessing out of it. Hope you heard some things that you needed to hear and needed to learn over the course of the conversation. Pray for Brother Nathan. Pray for that church down there. We appreciate your prayers for us here at Faith Baptist Church, and we'll talk to you next time. Thanks a lot.